Before we begin, I would also like to add a trigger warning for anyone who is sensitive to certain topics. Please take care when you're watching this video. Pause it, take a breath if you need to, or we will add timestamps so that you can skip around and skip over the parts that you may not be comfortable hearing or watching.
I remember having a panic attack in high school and the nuns in the office telling me, not calling 911, not calling my mother. They told me, well, sometimes God calls us home early, girls.
What?
So I was terrified I was going to die. I believed I was going to burn in hell until I was 44 years old. And I'm now 50. I really in my head believed that. Was I naive? No, I had disordered thinking as a result of having a neurodiverse brain at birth in a time period and in a high demand religion that told me these things that are just preposterous.
Yeah.
Because I was already uncomfortable in my own skin. And then I was being told I was female, so I was second class. Then I was being told that the priest was the voice of God. And I knew that if you spoke out against the priest, well, you were talking bad about the church, or you were going to make it worse, or you'd embarrass the family, or what's going to be solved by you saying anything.
Hey, my name is Shelise and this is Cults to Consciousness, where we discuss leaving high-demand religions or organizations and finding healing and independence through awareness and true individual sovereignty. As always, if you're only listening and you want to see our faces, you can go to our YouTube channel at Cults to Consciousness, where you can like, subscribe, join in on the conversation, leave those words of encouragement for our guests. They read all the comments, and it really just means a lot to all of us. So today's guest, she reached out because she was part of the Catholic Church, and this is something that I put the call out on the community page. We had a huge response, and we're still trying to narrow down and find all of these interviews, but we were excited to interview her. She grew up right when the split kind of happened to post-Vatican II, and she's going to be talking about her life growing up in the Catholic schools, her experience with the nuns, with the priests. This will be a little bit of a heavier episode, so just keep that in mind, guys. And I guess I'll just bring her on right now. Thank you so much for joining us, Kelly.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, of course. And something that I failed to mention earlier was that we also wanted to talk about how finding out that you are autistic later in life really kind of locked things into place for you and helped you better understand your childhood and how that would have made you a little bit more of a target. So I'm looking forward to getting into that more because we haven't discussed it and we have had people really asking for that. So I just really appreciate you being here and being willing to share openly and honestly.
Well, I'm very thankful that you have a platform I can share this on. For me, it was quite an epiphany recently about how autism played into my whole life. So.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about your upbringing. And actually, before I even start, I just want to point out that we are not calling the Catholic Church a cult. What we like to do here is find parallels in cult-like activities, cult-like behaviors, so that we can more fully understand and be aware of what's going on around us. If it is something that we're currently a part of, we can see the signs and the mind control and realize, you know what, I'm not going to partake in this, but this over here makes me happy and fulfilled. It's these type of things that really help bring awareness to the mind control and also the people who may be within these groups that are not great people who do want to control people and manipulate. And it's not always the people, it's the systems, right? So it's the systems that are raising these types of people who are eventually controlling and manipulating and abusing those who are within those systems. So I just had to point that out before we started, because I know that Catholicism is very widespread and there's lots of different groups and breakoffs. Today we are speaking specifically on Kelly's experience, Kelly's church, Kelly's leaders, and how that has affected her. So disclaimer over. Let's talk about you, Kelly, and your upbringing. If you want to talk about your parents, I know that you think that kind of played a role into how they raised you. Feel free to start there.
Yes. I was born in 1972. This is post-Vatican II when the church really divided, but I was not aware of that, obviously, as a child. I was born in Detroit. I was the third of four kids. My family was loving, loud, identified as Irish, Italian, Catholic. And so it was a lot of fun and loving. And even during dark times, that was always consistent, is that we were very dedicated to one another. We really loved each other. And things that were said and done, I took things very literal. So sometimes it hurt me and they didn't understand.
Mm-hmm.
So my family itself was just wonderful. But then when I went to Catholic school, we went to church on Sunday. We celebrated a lot of ceremony and pageantry with like Lent, which is the weeks leading to Easter, Christmas, which is Advent, the weeks leading to the holiday of Christmas. There was a lot of good things in among being Catholic. And so that's really important to me that I point out that there were good things in among my story. And my grandparents were Catholic, at least my grandmothers and my grandfather on one side. My great-grandfather was from Sicily, very Catholic. My great-grandmother, they were both alive when I was a child. My great-grandpa was divorced, and the big thing that I remember was that my grandmother never took communion while his first wife in Sicily was still alive because she was married and they were both divorced, and that was for some reason made her unworthy until that woman in Italy passed away. So I knew all of that from a young age. So Catholic, although I didn't even understand what it meant, I just knew I was Catholic and thought everybody was as a young person.
Right. And we did want to talk a little bit about the split and kind of what that means. So I'm new to Catholicism. I'm kind of learning. Remember, guys, I'm not an expert. I grew up in a cult. I just allow people to come on and tell their stories, and I learn as I go. I'm learning with you guys. So I'm doing my best. But when it comes to Catholicism, as far as I'm aware, before the 60s, everything was in Latin. It was a Latin mass. And then there was a switch where they tried to make things a little bit more softer. And so you had mentioned to me, Kelly, that your parents grew up in the Latin mass, the really strict rules and conditions, and you felt that that influenced the way that they raised you, even though the split or the change had happened and you were raised in the, I don't know, would you call it just like the softer Catholicism?
Yes, it didn't feel soft, but now when I look and learn, it was softer than it was for my folks.
Okay, so could you give us some examples of maybe how they grew up versus how you grew up, just some differences?
Yes, and like some of the very visible things that anybody who's Catholic would recognize would be that our nuns, the sisters, that dedicated their lives and were married to Christ. Before Vatican II, there were cloisters, and there were where they lived in a cell and they prayed, and the only men allowed in were priests and holy men, I guess. And those women would go, and they were free nurses, they were free teachers, they were free. That was their primary roles, was nurses and teachers. They would go to third world countries and, set up missions to help people. And how they were covered head to toe in like these overwhelming habits. And by the time I was in school, they were all excited because they had scaled it back and they no longer had big wings and they could see to the side instead of they were allowed to be more free in their dress. The priest before Vatican II would say Mass, which was your service, your church on Sunday, with his back to the congregation because he was held in such high esteem that he was saying the Mass to God and Jesus on the cross, and the peons were in the audience. And I hate to say it that way because I don't want to be hateful to people who believed this, because they really believed this and they still do some. But it was very controlling. It was very patriarchal. and it was very diminishing of women. After Vatican II, Mass could be said in a local language, whether that was English or Spanish, or it was no longer required to be in Latin. So that made the church more approachable to people who were not Catholic, that they could, do missionary work, increase the membership. And the reason Vatican II ultimately happened, from what I surmise, from what I've learned, not that I'm an expert, is that before Vatican II, there wasn't understanding of modern science. There was really, psychiatry was in its very, very infancy, although it had been an idea for a long time. So there was a lot more control of the members of the church because so many people were Christian Catholics. When people were getting information, be that newspaper, we were getting global news during our children or during our parents' lives, the population of the church started giving pushback, saying, hey, wait a minute, we can't be the only true thing, which is what many high demand religions claim. So then they met and had a council for several years with all the bishops, which are in the hierarchy. There's quite an extensive hierarchy in Catholicism, with the Pope being just under God, followed by, I think, the cardinal, then the archbishop, the bishop, the priest, and then the deacon. And the deacon was allowed to be a lay member who was married, not celibate. He could have a family, as opposed to the other holy men in the church. So that allowed the people after Vatican II to feel more a part of the church. They could read the scripture for the first time from the altar. You weren't allowed to walk on the altar prior to Vatican II. You were so beneath the ability, you were not holy enough to do that. And after Vatican II, you could not only be on the altar, specific guidelines, of course, but you could be able to, do a reading or speak from the pulpit, even if you were a female. So these were big, huge changes for this very controlled group of people by the church.
Yeah, if you had to point out some psychological differences, perhaps between how your parents grew up versus how you grew up, is there anything that you can kind of pick out?
I think the biggest thing, of course, within Catholicism that was before and after was the purity and the idea that the most important thing about you as a female was saving your virginity for your husband that you were going to one day meet. And again, that was the same for my mother as it was for me. Things were said to us that were very damaging, but they didn't know it. They would say, no man wants a girl who rode a bike, who everybody's ridden, right? Very damaging things that you laugh at and you think it's funny, but it really ingrains. And that was the same before and after, that your virginity was the most important thing. It was very celebrated that you were pure. Mind you, there was no healthy sexuality discussed within the church. Another thing that was allowed pre-Vatican II was corporal punishment. And although some of that residually hung on after Vatican II, people didn't tolerate priests and nuns hitting their children anymore. Of course, if you were an orphan or stuck in a Catholic institution, all bets were off. There was no one to protect you.
Right.
At least in my experience and what I know.
So let's actually talk about that within your schooling. So you went to school 1st through 12th grade at a Catholic school.
Correct.
And you had mentioned to me off camera kind of how the nuns were upset that all of a sudden the rules are different and they still kind of wanted to do things the same way. So can you describe what that was like?
Yes, and some of the nuns felt that way, and some of the nuns embraced the new way. Part of Vatican II was that they took our nuns, they took our sisters, which was the only female role you could have in the church, and they took those nuns and they told them that they were no different than the members of the church. They were just as holy, even though they were married to Christ and had this vow of celibacy, and all of their life had been dedicated to being Christ's bride in service of others. And they took that and they said, you are the same as everybody else in the church. Well, that caused a lot of division among the nuns. And the reason I believe this is because when convents, which is where women who marry Christ and are Catholic nuns used to live. When that started, that was done by European aristocrats who created these convents of poor Catholic women that basically it was a workhouse for poor Catholic women. That's what the convent was originally established, but they did it in the name of God and the Catholic Church. So a lot of women became religious sisters and nuns because they were the family sacrifice. So those women were forced into it. They didn't really have that autonomy that some of the newer sisters that chose it or thought they chose it. It could have been a number of reasons why they chose to become that. Perhaps they had same-sex attraction, so they decided, in order to be holy, I have to be a sister. Same with priests, right? Because of the celibacy involved with being a religious person, if you chose that, that was fine and it was good and you could live a good life. But then you had all of these people existing in this pre-system that many had no choice. And now you're 80 years old and you've dedicated your whole life. And now the priests that potentially in the past could have abused some of them. There's some real secret stories coming out about that kind of stuff that went on. I mean, they had the perfect storm. They lived in closed orders a lot of the time. So those women felt very damaged, understandably so. So they were very angry. So some nuns were like that. We also had lay teachers who were not nuns. They were just regular human beings who were everyday people, civilians, we called them, or they called them lay people in the Catholic Church. So everyone at my school was Caucasian, white. Everyone in my life was white, except for 2 people in my neighborhood that I'm aware of. And I grew up in Detroit in 1972. So whether they call it segregation or not, it was a very segregated society, and we had no knowledge of anything else. So you're dealing with, post-civil rights. We had all of this going on, and the church was controlling how we viewed all of this. I'm getting off topic, I believe. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. Actually, I'm curious, how did the Catholic Church view racism, or what was their view on other races?
I think it's very similar to how the Mormon Church even operates today and doesn't realize it, right? The Catholic Church, I call it now, and I mean no offense to anyone who is currently a devout Catholic. I call it, and I used to call it, the biggest business in the world. And at the time, they went with whatever seemed to be the general consensus, and they guided a lot of that, which was that Black was other. They were equal, but other. And the messaging around me at that time was, this is how I internalized it, no matter how bad it is for me. This is little me remembering my very first prayer. When I would question that if I'm Catholic and you can only go to heaven if you're Catholic, if I wasn't born Catholic, what would happen to me? Or if I wasn't born white, I couldn't go to heaven. And I remember my mom saying just to pray about it. So that made me feel like something was wrong with me. But I would pray and say, God, I know it's really hard for me. I know I'm hungry because times were tight sometimes. I know my shoes pinched because we couldn't afford to buy new shoes sometimes. Mind you, we were still giving money to the Catholic Church. I would say, but God, at least I'm not Black, because I saw that the Black people around me, and they were everywhere around this area I lived in, were just treated horribly, really horribly. And when you are a child in that environment, in the Catholic Church, my dad owned a store in the neighborhood. My dad and my mom loved all people and were kind to everyone. But when things were unjust, they could not stand up for injustice. So they were silent in order to maintain their business. Because the whole neighborhood, there was no internet to say, hey, Mike Riley loves all people, come shop here. It would put you out of business. So you have this conflict in your soul, and the church is telling you this. But race was a real big thing. As a matter of fact, my high school, I think we were the first or second graduating class that actually had a black girl in our class. And that was 1991. To me, that is insane. We live in Metro Detroit.
Right.
So I always felt sick because I knew what privilege was before I had a word for it. And then the Catholic Church told us there was nothing greater you could be than to be a martyr or a saint, to die for the faith. We celebrate all of these historic Catholics who died for the faith or performed miracles, but there's no evidence to any of it. And as a child, you believe what you're taught.
Mm-hmm.
And the constant threat of hell. We were taught at a young age without being baptized, a baby goes, originally the baby went to hell. It became that the baby went to the guff, which was like purgatory. You sat and waited because that's just where you were forever. And these were messages that were told to you in school. So it was so very confusing.
Right. Let's talk a little bit more about the actual day-to-day of your school life, because I'm not super familiar with it. Did you feel like you got a full education? And then on top of that, were there just religious studies included?
Yes, we had religion every day. We started our day with the Pledge of Allegiance and Our Father, and sometimes the Hail Mary, which are, I don't know if you know the Hail Mary. Mary's a huge star in the Catholic Church. She was the Virgin Mary who gave birth to Christ. And I always thought all Christians believed that Mary was a virgin. It's actually only recently that I've learned that not everybody believed that.
Oh, really? I didn't know that either.
Yeah, that Mary was a virgin, so we celebrated her a lot. So that was our prayers in the morning. Then we would have regular subjects, and then we would have a religious hour. We always went to church during school hours, not every day, but consistently. You had to obey. I mean, you weren't allowed to misbehave. You couldn't be a child. You couldn't be a fidgety child. It was really comply or you were spoken to very harshly. And I was a very meek child, so I just tried to do what I was supposed to do. I was trying to follow rules. I was trying, my mother was very stressed. My father, in hindsight, I think was very depressed because he was a Vietnam vet and also living under this Catholic belief.
Mm-hmm.
So day-to-day life was what I thought was normal, was just you went to school, you lived your life in this Catholic existence. And I thought everyone was Catholic and I thought everybody was doing the same things. And I thought everybody felt hungry and it was okay to suffer because you were suffering for God, to suffer is next to godliness. Purity is next to godliness. It really did not allow for questioning or exploration. And I was a child who wanted to learn. And when I found out something and it was very interesting or it conflicted, I would question, well, that was pretty frowned upon within that structure of compliance.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I make sense.
No, I think you're doing great. You're killing it.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, really, honestly. So did you find that the nuns that you were around were kind of the angry type that you'd mentioned, or did you feel like the corporal punishment stopped?
I feel like all adults in my school, and maybe it was just my perception, they were all very impatient. There were a few teachers that were kind. They were lay teachers. They were not nuns. They were very no nonsense. There was no room for any kind of emotions. Yeah, I just feel like there were very few adults that weren't complying with the idea that children were to be obedient at all times in the school. There was no room for individuality.
Mm-hmm.
And I found everything funny, which, I always laughed at pain or at suffering, or that's how my family was. So I was probably more of an irritating child to the teachers because I did question and that wasn't acceptable. And then I would be denied my truth. I'd say, well, that does not make sense, that if I am born Catholic by happenstance, that I get to go to heaven if I follow the rules. Sure seems like a better deal to be born and not a Catholic.
Right.
Because my mom says when you die, you get to learn all about Catholicism and have the opportunity. I would rather not know and have the opportunity after I've lived.
I said the same thing.
Well, that was really, really bad thing to say.
Right.
I just think it never made sense to me, but I was a very timid, afraid child. because of how harsh my environment was being Catholic, that I couldn't stand up. You couldn't stand up. If you stood up, you got punished. Be it being yelled at, we're disappointed in you, the guilt trip. It's not about being happy. Life's not fair. These messages were very common within our upbringing, right? I had to do it. So do you, that was the mentality around children. And the Catholic Church was so restrictive. We had holy days. You had to go to Mass on holy days. You had to eat fish on Fridays in Lent. You couldn't eat meat. I would say that makes no sense. That was, I was such a sinner because I thought there was nothing wrong with eating regular food on Friday. But I think where it went off the rails was not understanding how sexualizing children at a very young age. And I say this because they always talked about saving yourself for marriage, but they never told us about human development or what was normal. Body was shameful. And I think that was the most damaging thing, because by the time I was in third grade, for Lent, which was the 4 weeks leading up to Easter, there was a priest who came to our school. And this priest, I had been having a hard time. Kids kind of picked on me. I was a weird kid. I looked odd. I had really white blonde hair. I had very large lips. I was an unusual looking kid. I didn't look like my sisters. They were dark. I was blonde. But I got picked on, or at least I perceived I was picked on more than other kids. And I think the nun or the teacher told the father who was visiting that I was having a hard time. Now, this is the perfect situation. I don't know that that happened, but it makes sense to me now. This priest came into our class and he said to us, "Can you tell me ways that you can kill people?" Well, everybody raised their hands and said, "Oh, with a knife, with a gun, with rope." They came up with all these horrible ways to kill people, right? And then I raised my hands and I said, "You can kill people with words." So I feel that this was all kind of like behind the scenes. I was this vulnerable child. Perhaps the nun or teacher told this priest who was visiting us that I was really having a hard time. Maybe with all good intention, she said, "Can you pay special attention to this student?" I don't know. But this answer apparently really impressed this priest. And I felt so good about this answer. And the teacher or the nun, I can't remember, was really happy with me, really pleased. And I remember this. Now, this priest was not a regular priest. He was a priest that served missions in third world countries. He was there to give us these paper folded rice bowls that we would put together, and they made a bank. And so during Lent, all our money was supposed to go, all our change and money was supposed to go into the rice bowl to feed the poor in his mission. So we're all hyped up and excited about this rice bowl. Well, then I was invited to spend time with this priest, lunch, and he was only there a few days. I don't even know how many days he was there. But what I know is he touched me. And in my mind, if you weren't raped, you're fine, because that was the messaging. It was always a misunderstanding if somebody touched you. I don't even know if I had the words, because I was a child.
Yeah.
Just to tell you how innocent and naive my mother was, she didn't realize she never told me about my period. I didn't know. I only knew because I had two older sisters. And even then, there was such conflict and I had such discomfort by then with who I was. I didn't have close relationships. I also believe there was another, well, I know another adult in my life, or young adult. It wasn't an adult, but it was a younger person, was out of line with me and touched me frequently. And I didn't recognize it for what it was, and I just pushed it down. Just like I pushed down what the priest had done to me. I couldn't recognize what it was, but it really did at that moment really shatter the direction of my life.
Yeah. I'm so sorry that you went through that. That's awful. And we talk about purity culture all the time, because it's like when you aren't giving these kids a framework of what their body is, even just the names, the anatomy of your own body, and
Yes.
understanding boundaries. And it really puts kids in a dangerous position. And I know that the intention of purity culture is, of course, to not have sex till you're married because it's safer. Maybe you won't contract STIs or whatever it is, and you won't get
Or get
pregnant.
pregnant.
Like, yes, I get it, and it all makes sense, and the intention is there, but it oftentimes has the opposite effect when you only are teaching abstinence and you're not explaining everything to these kids. And it puts them in these positions where they don't understand something is happening to them. Or
Yeah.
if they do understand it, they feel ultimate shame because they've been taught that you can't be a bicycle that everyone's ridden, you know? And so it really creates a lot of pain and difficulty there for the children when it's supposed to be doing the opposite, which is why we frequently bring it up and talk about it and normalize talking about it, because it's such a taboo subject on its own. It makes people feel really uncomfortable, but that's what we do, is we get really uncomfortable on this channel.
Yes.
So thank you so much for being willing to share that. And I know you also wanted to mention, we had talked off camera about how, looking back now, you feel like being autistic may have made you more of a target. Did you want to talk more on that?
Yes, because I was a human being who was born very uncomfortable once I was outside of my family that I knew was security and love. And the further I got away from that family that loved me and was safe, even if they picked on me, I knew I was loved. And the further I got away from them and into Catholicism and Catholic school, the more afraid I was, because textures bothered me, fabrics bothered me, sunlight was very harsh to my eyes. I was very sensitive to noise. I cried all the time. So I was this really overly sensitive, probably unlikable little frail blonde kid. And my family loved me, accepted me, and told me how unique and wonderful and beautiful I was. And I did feel that way until I left home and got into the world. So I think I love people and I want to be around people, but people take me wrong all the time. They interpret me wrong. And also, life is nuanced. There is no black and white, lie and truth. When you add emotions, my brain understood and picked up emotions really well because I had to learn how to survive in this really harsh world. And the nuns were particularly harsh. High school and the belief system that I was only valuable for my virginity. By the time I was in high school, the first boy that kissed me, I had a full-on panic attack. I ran away and went in the house. I thought it was the grossest thing that ever happened to me. I mean, how crazy is that? It really affected everything about myself because I was already uncomfortable in my own skin. And then I was being told I was female, so I was second class. Then I was being told that the priest was the voice of God. And I knew that if you spoke out against the priest, well, you were talking bad about the church, or you were going to make it worse, or you'd embarrass the family, or what's going to be solved by you saying anything. This was the messaging around me. When when something newsworthy was about an assault, a sexual assault, I mean, the messaging around me was, well, what was she wearing? Why was she out after 10 o'clock? Instead of, well, she had every right to be out at 10 o'clock at night. And I knew that as an adult. But I was so indoctrinated into this belief system and nothing making sense. My very first sexual experience, I do not remember. This is what I remember. I went to dinner at my boyfriend's apartment at college. It was the fall before my senior year of high school, so I was 17. I was still a virgin. I had been definitely touched inappropriately by so many men in my life. Even one of my dad's friends dancing at a bar one night unhooked my bra and thought it was funny. That was a real mess with my senses because I was believing all of this stuff they were telling me. And then they were telling me that the rules didn't apply to them, basically, I guess.
Right.
So I went to dinner at my boyfriend's apartment at college, and All I remember is getting out of bed and going to the bathroom and there being blood in my underwear. Now, whether I disassociated, whether I said no, I have no idea. Whether he thought he had consent, I don't know. I'm not angry at him. But the reason I think there's something to that particular experience is because I know I felt like I was ruined after that. And I know that my friend that had been my friend since I was a young 12-year-old girl was who I married because he asked me. And I loved him as a friend, but I didn't know anything about life. And I got married to him because he asked me and because I thought, well, I can love him. I love everybody and he's nice to everybody. But that really wasn't who he was, and I was 19. So I wasn't forced to get married by anyone. As a matter of fact, my parents were shocked. I went and got married by the justice of the peace and then had a church wedding later. And that was like one of the greatest pains of their life. So.
Right. So you feel like you felt like you needed to get married because you felt like you weren't worthy enough or no one would want you because of the purity culture messaging?
Right. Because my first husband, my only husband, was very kind at parties and socially in high school and was welcoming to everybody, but he wasn't Catholic. And so he was very promiscuous with girls. And I was aware of this. Well, I thought, well, he won't care that I'm not a virgin. And that was my reasoning for why I married this guy. I thought he was nice. I thought he loved me. And I thought he wouldn't care I wasn't a virgin.
Mm-hmm.
That is why I chose my husband. And that is a really messed up way of thinking. And it wasn't fair to him or me.
Sure.
But then began the snowball effect from that point on.
Yeah. Do you want to continue with the story? Is there anything else that you wanted to mention about your childhood first?
In my childhood, things that really stick out, I'm trying to think. I remember if I was late in high school. In high school, we had Felician nuns, which were very strict, angry women for the most part. And they were all elderly. I think most of them are probably gone now. I think in high school, we had far more nuns teaching us than lay people, which would be, people who were not religious order. They were very angry and that is where I experienced just hateful behavior. I remember having a panic attack in high school and the nuns in the office telling me, not calling 911, not calling my mother. They told me, well, sometimes God calls us home early, girls, because I was with my best friend, Echo.
What?
So I was terrified I was going to die.
Wow.
Yes. Other things that were said to me. I know we had a perverted priest at lunch. We had one really good priest, Father Rene, who was the sweetest human being you could ever meet. And he did work in third world countries. And so he looked like he was 105, but now I realize he was only like 55 or 60.
Mm-hmm.
But he was really weathered because he had been in the third world countries doing his work. But he was the sweetest priest, and I loved him. You could tell him pretty much anything within reason. And confession. Oh, have I talked about confession?
You literally read my mind. Right when you said that, I was like, I need to bring up confessional.
Okay. I'm all over the place, but I'm going to go back to growing up Catholic, you have sacraments. Sacraments would be similar. I call them parallel to the idea of the covenants you make in the Mormon temple, right? So in Catholicism, you make sacraments. Your first sacrament is baptism. You don't have a choice. You are baptized at birth. You are assigned godparents. You're a Catholic from the first baptism, from that time on. Then when you're in school, you're training to be a Catholic. So by second grade, this milestone is that you have to go to confession in order to receive First Communion, which is the second and third sacraments, right? So you got to go to confession. So you have to study about sin and you have to know, and this is where they really drill home, purity and all of that. And confession is similar to a Mormon going and have to tell the bishop, right? It's got to be quiet. They can't tell anybody. You can tell the priest anything. And then you go alone. And sometimes it was in a dark curtained room with the priest on the other side of the wall. Sometimes you went into the confession and it was you in a chair and the priest in the chair. And you had to say your chanted, recited, "Bless me, Father, for I have sinned. I have not been to confession in X amount of days. Here are my sins," right? And then you tell the priest. And then the priest gives you your penance, which is, say the rosary 3 times, or I don't know, he would assign prayers or go make amends or whatever he would tell you to do. And then you'd have to go out and do these repetitive prayers about how awful you are, right? And you had to say, "Oh my God, I am heartily sorry for my sins. In choosing to sin and failing to do good, I have sinned against you and your church. I firmly believe, with the help of your Son, Jesus Christ, to make up for my sins and to live as I should." So this is what you're forcing children to recite and understand and say to this priest.
Mm-hmm.
2nd grade, you're 7 years old, right? So this is the indoctrination into that, right? So I have to do that. And now they're telling me how I put him on that cross and the Last Supper, and that host is truly the flesh. The priest changes that host into the flesh of Christ. And I have to be worthy to receive that every Sunday. So you have to go to confession, and you have to, just to be worthy to take the little piece of bread and to drink the sip of wine from the communal cup, which grossed me out as a kid.
Mm-hmm.
Even not knowing that I was having sensory issues. I didn't know what was wrong with me. I remember my very first confession. I was in sheer terror, panic, didn't want to do it. I would cry. I didn't like attention. I didn't want to go. Not to mention, I could not think of a sin. I was 7. So my very first sin is my very first confession. I lied to the priest to confess that I stole my friend's Barbie clothes. My very first sin as a 7-year-old girl to this holy man, because I was so unworthy, was to lie. They taught me to lie, or else I would be frowned upon or looked down on, or didn't do what I was supposed to. 7 years old. From the outside, it's insanity.
Mm-hmm.
Every May, if you were popular and special and the priest and the nuns liked you, they'd select whoever that most popular girl was, and she got to be the May Queen, and she got to put a ring of flowers through a procession onto the statue of Mary that was outside of our Catholic school in this wooded, shrouded area we called the Grotto. That was like the epitome in high school, was to be able to crown Mary in May. I mean, this stuff is such idolatry, and I didn't realize that when I was in it.
Yeah.
I couldn't see it. I was so immersed in it, and I believed it. It like really, my journey to figure out why I was so influenced in it is how I'm able to just look at it now and be okay.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes sense.
It makes total sense.
It's how I deal with the trauma.
Yeah, I was the same way, because when you grow up in something, it's your normal and it just makes sense and you don't really question it. Or maybe you question it, but then someone gives you a placated answer and you're like, okay, I'll just leave it over there. And you just keep pushing things off to the side until eventually you can't ignore it anymore. But a lot of times it's just, yeah, this is how it is. Like,
that's
for me,
the way it's always been.
Worshiping Joseph Smith and like, oh, wow, the prophet, and he restored the true church. And I was the exact same way, where I was like, wow, I can't believe I was so lucky enough to be born into the one true church on the planet. And I was just like, wow, thanks, God. You really did me a solid. Not knowing that every single person in every single religion is thinking the exact same thing. It's like, isn't that a little convenient? Isn't that a little fishy that all of us are thinking the same thing?
Think about this in the context of, like, your mom's age. We didn't have any information. So we talk about these bubbles that we live in, right?
Yeah.
But our bubbles were so small. Know what was going on next in the next neighborhood, let alone what was going on globally. If it wasn't on the news, which was only on 3 channels, or if you're lucky you had 4, if it wasn't on the news or in the newspaper, and you as a child weren't paying attention, you didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
It was like we were living in this conditional love. If we didn't comply with what the church was expecting of us, then you were punished.
Yeah.
I mean, that was the bottom line. And whether that punishment was physical or emotional, or they wouldn't talk to you, or they would tell you to pray about it, there's something wrong with you, or the church is more important than your little soul when we hurt you. Don't you ruin a good man. We need priests. Don't ruin a priest's life. This is the messaging all around it that allowed it to stay so secret for so long.
Yeah.
It was the perfect environment to violate other people.
Right. Did you ever feel comfortable enough coming forward and telling your parents about what the priest had done to you?
It was only one priest, and I never told them. And the reason I never told them is because, first of all, when I was a child, I didn't, because I don't think I had the language, and I don't think they would have been capable of processing and dealing with it, because nobody was at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't tell them now, although if my dad sees this or my mom sees this, I don't know that they will. They would feel so god awful that they didn't protect me from that I don't want them to feel any pain. And that's a stupid thing to say, because when my children suffer pain, I suffer pain, right? But I don't need to add to any suffering. My parents have been through it, and they love us, and they have made it work and stayed married, heck, 57 years, and they're still alive and together. And I'm so lucky that I have them on this planet. My mother could not apologize. And I think the reason my mother was unable to apologize is because she felt so helpless in life from her own upbringing, right? She was so traumatized, and she was just trying to get through. My dad was drafted to Vietnam out of a small town that my parents were from. And being a good Catholic boy from a small town, you served your country when you were drafted. Well, we look back at Vietnam and we see what an atrocity it all was. And to resolve that you took part in that is a very difficult thing to face, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't need to add any trauma to my own family and my own parents. They love me, and I'm alive because they love me. I heal, and they did better as they got older. They're no longer Catholic. They're Lutherans now, which I call Catholic light. And I went on to live a miserable 21 years. I was an absent mother because I was stuck in my pain. I was short-tempered. I cried. I was emotionally dysregulated. And thank God for the grace of my incredible young children. Because let me tell you, they are able to extend me such grace, and it allows me to have grace for myself, and it allows me to have grace for my parents. But I'm just happy now.
Yeah, this is actually perfect, because I wanted to segue into your life, becoming a wife and a mother, and at what point you decided to leave Catholicism.
Now, my mom and dad love each other like nobody's business. They both came from challenging upbringings, small town, World War II parents, or if my grandpa didn't serve, he worked in the factory. I thought that my husband would be like my dad. That is what I thought. I thought husbands loved their wives like my dad loved my mom. That was my only frame of reference. I also thought you had to stay married. God hated divorce. When I got married, I really didn't go to church anymore. I did not get married in the Catholic Church. I got married in the Lutheran Church because my husband was Lutheran. And I called it Catholic Light because as long as you were sorry, you could be saved. Mm-hmm. And I thought, well, that's easy. not realizing how screwed up all of this short period of 19 years had made my thinking. I didn't know who I was anymore. I thought my husband was going to be like my dad and be supportive of me and my cheerleader like I would be for him. But this was a one-sided relationship because unfortunately the person I married, and I don't know why he's the way he is, and I do because I know his family, he wanted to live a different life than I did. I wanted family, and I thought I wanted children because I was trying to follow the rules. The next step in life to be happy was to get married. I got married. Then the next step was to have children. So, I lost a pregnancy, and that was difficult. I married him and he moved me away from home. I started having severe agoraphobia and couldn't leave my apartment in North Carolina when he was in the service. And I thought when he got out of the service, we would come home and I'd be near my family again. And his decision was that we would go to Virginia. Well, that really set me. I didn't know how to, I went into complete shutdown. I couldn't leave my apartment. I was always sick. I couldn't eat. My family brought me home. And when I got home, I got on medication, started seeing a therapist, got better, or at least I thought I got better. They masked the symptoms of what was really wrong with me, which was I didn't know who I was, because when I tried to speak my mind or what I felt or believed, I would be told, no, that's not true. And I was very gullible. So I would just go along with what they said to me. Basically, my husband. So he moved us 3 times. I eventually got a really good job and I was getting really good money. And he kept switching jobs and taking pay cuts. And I once, when my daughter was 3 months old, I had a 2-year-old and a 3-month-old. I once had the courage to tell him I wanted a divorce because I was unhappy. And he immediately told me I couldn't get divorced. We couldn't afford it. And he loved me and he cried and all this. And me being a good-hearted person and wanting to keep my family intact, I stayed. And that was probably a huge mistake. I know it was. But everything happens for a reason. Fast forward, I continued to get less and less functional in society because I didn't understand people and nobody was following the rules, is what I thought. But really, I didn't understand the rules I was living by was a really screwed up way of thinking that was from my childhood being this Catholic girl in these environments. And I don't think I have expressed, like, we laughed about the things that the nuns would say and do to us. But for example, senior year, we had to do service hours. On our grounds at our high school, it was all barbed wired in, and it was a 1 square mile. There was the hospital run by the nuns. There was a hospice care run by the nuns. There was the convent where the nuns lived. And there was this giant building that looked like a castle, and it was gorgeous as only Catholics can build. It was called the Mother House. And in the Mother House was this beautiful crucifix-shaped chapel, the altar in the middle. So it was like you were sitting in this beautiful chapel. Well, in the basement of this beautiful building with this beautiful chapel is where they stock all of the old dying nuns. And for our service hours, I had to bulb syringe liquid food at 17 years old into women that looked like they were corpses.
Whoa.
And I had no option to say no. I was terrified in the building because it was like a big old dank basement in this under this big castle like mother house. What are other things they did? We had to do whatever they said. And now this wasn't, I don't think, specifically Catholic, although maybe it was. We were really worried about scoliosis. They would make us strip down to our bras and panties in junior high, go up to this strange person at the front of the room who was apparently a doctor or whatever, and bend over, stand up, do all these different things so they could check us for scoliosis. I mean, this stuff, they would do like dental care in the middle of school. Now, I don't know if that was because of finances in our community or if that was just what they were doing at our school. I don't know. But these things were allowed. We had no autonomy over ourselves. We had to do what they told us. It's just such a mind-bending experience. All of it has been.
Yeah. And you're trying to unravel this in your mid-20s when you have children now and you're married and you still are trying to find yourself and not really understanding at this point that you have autism as well, that you're trying to work through and figure out. And so at what point did you realize you needed to drop Catholicism completely? Or had you really, at that point, you already had?
My children became school age, right? Now, when I had my son, he was born with supraventricular tachycardia, which is a heart condition. My pregnancies were horrible. I already had really bad body image because of the shame and purity culture of don't show your shoulders, don't wear a dress that has a little tiny cutout in the back, you're a whore. So I was really uncomfortable with being pregnant, and I was a very frightened woman being pregnant. I had my son. At 12 days old, my son had really rapid respiration. And and a friend of the family mentioned it. She was a nurse. And then one night it just really started to make me panic. He was breathing like, panting like a dog, and he was 12 days old. So my sister took me to the hospital. They dropped everything. He crashed in front of me. His heart stopped and he died. He was 12 days old.
Gosh.
I was sitting on a stool and I was very calm. I was just going, fixed him, fixed him, fixed him. And I called my husband from that ER room and I said, I need you to meet me at Beaumont, which was the specialist hospital for pediatrics, because they had revived him. Thank God, this pediatric cardiologist, it was her last day at that hospital. This was not a pediatric hospital. I called my husband and said, please come to the hospital. And he said, I can't, I'm working. He was a police officer. And I said, and I screamed, your son just died. So that trauma happened. That was a year of me living in the PICU. I don't want to go into too many details about that, but that was very traumatic. But I just pushed everything down because you just had to keep going, right? Because that's what I was told. Pull yourself up, keep going. Be a martyr, give everything of yourself. These are the messages around being a Catholic. Then my daughter was born. And when she was born, that's when I wanted to leave. But he asked me to stay, so I stayed. Well, I just kept getting sicker and sicker. I just couldn't function, and I didn't know what was wrong with me. You know, because you believe it's you. Nobody else around me was having these same experiences. Nobody else. I didn't understand. I was always on this journey of why? Why did my sisters not feel this way about these same things? They were there with me. Did they not experience this? And they would tell me that didn't happen. That didn't happen. And I'd say, yeah, it did.
Yeah.
So I was being denied what really happened to me. And I couldn't acknowledge that it doesn't matter what they say to me. Those things really did happen, and it really did affect me this way. And I don't have to be a victim of it anymore. I just want to find healing and health and happiness and just find radical acceptance.
Yeah.
And accountability. I want people to be accountable. Not people for me, but accountable to change.
Yeah. And that's one of the worst things, too, when they gaslight you and tell you that you're crazy and you're the problem and nothing happened and everything's fine. And it's probably the worst thing that they could do, because it does make everything internalize and you think, oh, I am the problem, not thinking maybe it's the giant corporation that has been manipulating and controlling me my entire life. They'll never take accountability for that.
And that's how I look at it. This is how I look at it now, is that the only way I can find joy in life is to say, I was born with a perfectly intellectually functioning brain into socioeconomic and religious environment and time in history that was not prepared for my type of brain. There was never anything wrong with me. I just operated very differently and nobody understood me. And that's okay. It was never okay to just accept that people don't have to understand me. I just have to be a good person and have good intent with no malice and do better.
Yeah. I know you also wanted to mention how you enrolled your children into Catholic school and kind of the effects that it caused them after speaking to them now as adults.
Oh, Lord, yes. I can't believe I glossed over this piece. So my children, I was under the misunderstanding because we were always told how Catholic education was superior. You know, the rah-rah, being a Mormon is best, being a Catholic is best.
Yeah.
We moved back to Michigan eventually after living in North Carolina and Virginia, my husband and I. We were childless for 7 years. So things were going pretty well as far as we lived our own lives. We were pretty happy. Life was good. Well, then when my son was born and had heart problems, I did not have a partner in my marriage. I had someone who only thought his job was to provide. I think that's what he believed. That's all I can see from it. He saw his role as the man, as the provider, I think, and nothing else was important. So he loved our son, and I think he loves our daughter the best he can, but he just wasn't able to be the father that they needed or the husband that I needed. I decided to send them to Catholic school because I believed it was a superior education, because that's what I was told.
Mm-hmm.
And, if I'm nothing if not compliant half the time. I can be mad, but I was compliant. I could be hurt, but I was compliant. So I chose to send him there. Now, the best thing that happened in regard to that is that my daughter did not do well in Catholic school, because my daughter is a brilliant, wonderful mind. And she is very stubborn and confident in who she is. If she knows her mind, thank God. Thank God one of us did. And if it's injustice, boy, she's saying it with all the 21-year-old rage of injustice that you feel when you're 21. But my daughter has always been that way. And I'm so grateful for that, because she did really poorly in Catholic school. Like, they really would talk to us about, like, suspending my kindergartner. Now, mind you, my daughter was born in 2002, so this is not like ages ago. You still have to be compliant to go to Catholic school, right?
Yeah.
Well, I was devolving. I had lost my job at this point. I had a really good job that paid me really well, and I had lost my job because I was insane. I didn't know how to operate in this world. Like, I didn't know who I was. I didn't know what I believed. I didn't know what made me happy. So I lost my job. So my kids had to come out of Catholic school. That was the best thing that ever happened, was that my kids went to public school. We lived in a suburb of Detroit. We had great schools. It was working class people, but it was middle class, and it was diverse. My kids got to be, no other kids of different races, different faiths, different religions. I got to know parents that were different than me. I've always been fascinated by learning. So that was probably the good thing. But I was really handicapped by my belief systems. So my kids escaped. My daughter was out by third grade, or maybe she was out by first, and she was out by third, and my son was out by fifth. My son did really well in Catholic school. He thrived. I don't know why, but he did really well. He struggled a little more in public school. He probably required more structure than my daughter, and that's how he learned. But they're both wonderful. My son's a journeyman electrician now. He makes 6 figures at 23 years old with no student loan debt. I could not be more proud of the individuals they are. And my daughter's just incredible, and 21, and figuring out her what makes her happy, and she's just amazing.
Yeah. And I know that you had spoken to her off camera to kind of get permission and get her perspective on what it was like growing up in Catholic school. Did you want to share that?
Yes. The only thing I can say is that because I had unhealthy understanding of human sexuality for myself, and because my mother did, I didn't educate my daughter in regard to that. I let her dress how she wanted. I never shamed her for her body. I was always telling her how beautiful she was inside and out. I made nothing about, she is traditionally beautiful in my opinion, but what I didn't do was I prepared her for a period. Oh my gosh, that poor kid probably was tired of reading about periods. I made sure all the things that I missed out on, that I knew I missed out on, that I covered. But human sexuality and consent, didn't touch it. So I think her feelings about herself and her body were greatly damaged by third grade because of that Catholic education, and she feels that way as well. And that's what she told me I could share. That really did such damage to the kind of intelligent, beautiful brain that she thankfully has, that she allowed herself to be, in situations where she didn't know how to say no. And that was my fault, because I didn't educate her. And it was my fault, and it wasn't. You do the best you can with what you know. And then when you know better, you do better, Maya Angelou,
Yeah.
And we have found healing and continue to find healing.
Oh, good. I'm really glad that you said that yes, there is some accountability there, but also you did the best that you could. And that's all we can really do. And it's amazing that you're able to acknowledge that and where you were and where you are now. And also, I know that you have an incredible relationship with your daughter, and that's amazing.
I do. She's incredible.
I'm so happy to hear that.
And I'm working with my son.
Oh, you are?
Well, not working, but I'm working on trying to restore that relationship better.
Oh, got it. Right. Okay.
Because there were real gender. This is something I do want to mention. Because there were very defined gender lines in our house. My ex-husband did everything with my son. He did nothing for me. He really was very little involved with my daughter, but he did everything with his son. And I pretty much did everything with my daughter. So my daughter and I cooked. My son took out the garbage, right? Or did some things, but he was waited on. He was really coddled, and that's my fault. And that was really unfair. But I only had sisters, and I only had a father, and I thought that's what I was supposed to do with my son. He turned out to just be a really good, compassionate guy, but he was very left on his own. He was alone when my husband left, and I was so damaged when my husband left, thinking I had failed at life and very suicidal, that I really let my son down in that regard. But he forgives me, and we work on that, and I try to find a close relationship with him now, because when my ex
Yeah.
left me, he might as well have left all of us, because he was very minimally involved in their lives, and I was a very sick woman. And whether that's because he couldn't deal with me because I was crazy, or for whatever reason, he just couldn't be there. So I think my son is actually, he got shortchanged pretty big, I think, in regard to parenting.
But you're doing your best now to change things
That's
around and be
right.
there.
That's
And
right.
I want to hear your consciousness side of the story and really what makes you happy and at peace now.
Well, I really struggle with, I question my own self a lot. I have to really take a lot of time to be mindful. And it's hard to trust your voice and feel like you're being concise and understood and not hurting people. So I just move through life with good intention and no malice. And anything I do it because I choose to. I've learned to say no. I learned how to set boundaries. Don't always succeed at it, but I feel really good when I do. And I get better at it the more I do it.
Yeah.
I love to garden. I love to garden. I spend a tremendous amount of time with our local shelter working with the dogs. Um, I work with the cats a little bit. I have a couple cats at home. I met a terrific guy that allowed me, after all the chaos of my life, COVID, my partner Matt, and my desire to find why I was the way I was like the perfect thing to let me just be vulnerable, feel the pain, and acknowledge the truth of my life.
Mm-hmm.
And that included what I endured, what I caused other people to endure because of my pain. And so now I just want to let it all go and just be a good person and move forward.
Yeah.
And that's really, I live now to be a positive influence on my children and the people I encounter in a daily life. And I really just try, I try to set healthy boundaries around, because I will give you the shirt off my back. I'll give other people everything at detriment to myself to make other people happy, because that's how much I really care about people. So learning to set that healthy boundary that it's okay to take care of myself. It's okay to be kind to myself and to not let people trigger me.
Mm-hmm. And if they do, learning how to regulate, because that's something I've been working on, because it's going to happen. Whether, I mean, of course, the intention is never there. Like, no one tries to trigger you, but, well, maybe. But for the most part, people are not trying to trigger you, but it does happen. And so just learning to regulate is such a big thing, and it can be so
Oh,
helpful.
God. That is so true. I do that. Like, to be okay with being disappointed in people when, to me, they're obviously, like, there are certain things that are just obvious, and if you can't see them, it's very frustrating to me. Like, hello, I don't care who you are, what your religion is, what your skin color is. I don't care what language you speak. We are all human beings.
Yeah.
And I don't care what your sexuality is. I don't care about any of that. If you are kind to me, I'll be kind to you. I don't want to control anybody else. I'm no better than anyone else. I'm no less than anybody else. I've had opportunities that other people haven't had. I've had more and I've had less. And that's just the nature of humanity. It is, to be alive and to exist is a miracle. Just to be here is the miracle. What's next? I don't know. I don't care. Just to exist and be kind and loving and just be the person that you truly are as a human being with, that's what matters. That's what inspires me to keep going.
Yes, I love that. And that's it. That's the awareness. That's the consciousness, is just being present and being loving and being kind and understanding that you're in control and that you don't have to be controlled by anybody else around you. You can do things the way that you want to do things if you're not hurting anybody else and you're just really living your truth. That's amazing.
And that I can be confident when people disagree with me, that that's okay. I learned from people that disagree with me. We have this extreme reaction in America, and I think globally in a great extent, where they have us focused on like one issue, for example. And I'm going to bring up the abortion issue in regard to this because in Catholics, that's the end all be all.
Mm-hmm.
Divide us on this issue of abortion still today in 2023. This has been a heated debate politically as long as I can remember. And we get the right to our own autonomy in our own bodies, and then we lose it. And we get the right, and then, or whatever, or states want to regulate our bodies. We live in a world where if that's really something you need to have, we can help each other as women achieve that goal. But that does not need to be our number one worry right now in this world. There are so many real, relevant issues that they're trying to distract us from with this one abortion as an example of an issue that we've beaten to death like a dead horse. But we're still ignoring the real issue, which is we don't teach critical thinking in our schools from a young age and require it in all schools, right? I don't care if you want to have your kid learn about Catholicism and the customs and all of that, but your Catholic curriculum needs to include critical thinking skills and outside sources.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that would go a long way to making change in our country as a whole. Just critical thinking.
Yeah, critical thinking and acceptance.
Right?
I think that's the hardest part, is when you grow up in a high control group, it's, critical think all of you want, but if you don't get the answer that we told you to get, then it's not going to be accepted. And so it's still squashed. It's like, yeah, make all of your choices, but make the right choice.
And how stressful is it on a young mind to think that you're going to burn in hell?
Yeah.
That if you make a human mistake, you're going to burn in hell. I mean, when I had sex, was assaulted, didn't consent, whatever happened to me senior year, when that happened to me, I believed I was going to burn in hell.
Mm.
And subconsciously, even though I left the church, I believed that I was doomed to go to hell until I was 44 years old. And I'm now 50.
Mm-hmm.
I really, in my head, believed that. Was I naive? No, I had disordered thinking as a result of having a neurodiverse brain at birth in a time period and in a high demand religion that told me these things that are just preposterous.
Yeah.
To me. I don't mean to say that it's preposterous to have faith, but
yeah, no, I understand that.
With no nuance to it.
Right, exactly. The black and white thinking.
Correct.
And with that, I need to get your Linda Listen statement, your sassy statement.
Oh, Lord.
Or inspiration.
My Linda Listen is, love the children you have, not the children you dreamed you would have. Listen to your kids with an open mind because you will learn so much from them. Own your stuff and just laugh at the mistakes and find forgiveness for yourself and for each other. That's it.
Yeah, that's amazing. I love it. Well, I'm just so happy that you came on and shared your story. Thank you so much again for being brave and vulnerable. It really means a lot. Do you have any final thoughts before we go?
No, I just wish you so much luck, and I hope that somebody connects with this interview and understands and feels less alone.
I'm sure that they will. I'm sure that they will.
I hope so. I hope so. Thank you so much, Shelise.
Thank you so much again. This has been amazing. And guys, if you want to leave some comments, leave some words of encouragement for Kelly here, who came on and told her story so openly and honestly. I'm sure she'll read the comments. I like to read the comments and see what you guys are up to. And if you want to support the podcast, you can join our Patreon at patreon.com/cults2consciousness. You can buy some merch at cults2consciousness.com. We have some fun t-shirts over there and some mugs and things. And our most exciting thing yet is we are planning our first ever C2C vacation so that we can get to know you guys. We really want to spend some one-on-one time with this amazing community that we've been able to build and just get to know you more in some place around the world. We're just really excited to venture off and I don't know, just get to know you guys. So we want to know where you want to go, which is why we have a survey link in the description. So click on that as soon as possible. Let us know where you want to go, what time of year is best. And based on your answers, we are going to curate this vacation and announce it within the next few weeks. So definitely do that now if you want to be the first to know when the actual date, time, and place drop, because there's probably only going to be 8 to 20 spots and we can't wait. So that's that. And if you like this video, I'll put a few more here that you may want to check out. And until next time, follow your highest excitement, be conscious, and be well.